Most of my video ideas come from disagreements with other prepper channels. This is no exception. A well-known prepper recently suggested that once a crisis starts, we aren't preppers anymore, we're survivalists. I disagree. I think the prepping mindset can and should endure into a crisis. I'm going to explain why I think this, the mistakes in mindset people can make, and then the alternatives I'm going to suggest instead. The central problem I took issue with is the idea that a crisis is a binary thing. This is rarely the case. You'll likely have some warning it might be coming. Once it's got serious, you might have ebbs and flows of recoveries and setbacks. You don't know how long these will last, and sometimes it's difficult to see whether circumstances are actually getting better or worse while you're in the thick of it. The crisis doesn't tell you when it starts and stops, or what stage it's in. I watched a scenario exercise done by a bunch of preppers in which a crisis was evolving. At an unbelievably early stage, they were saying that they wouldn't be going into work, they'd be calling family to get them to come home as soon as possible, and so on. Understandable, perhaps, as they're in the opening minutes of a scenario which is due to last 45 minutes or so. But come on. If every time there was the slightest issue you bunkered down at home and you'd be off work every Tuesday, we've got bills to pay and food to put on the table. Think of the characters in a disaster movie, but right at the start of the movie. We can scroll to the bottom of the screen and see how long the film has left to run. The characters can't do that. They don't even know they're in a disaster movie. They just know that something has gone wrong. Now imagine the camera started rolling every time something went wrong. Most films would be very short, as normalcy returned very quickly. The bad thing happened, some action was taken to mitigate it, or they took the hit and moved on with their day. But those circumstances never make it to our screens because it would be a rather unique movie that ran for 2 hours of everyone going on with their lives after an early setback. No, the ones that make it to screen are the ones that have compounding setbacks, one after another. But played correctly, the characters don't know if they're in a 5-minute video that never makes it to release or the epic disaster movie. There's a hint, by the way. If you ever run AI scenarios, make sure that a reasonable number of them end quickly and relatively painlessly. That can help teach you proportionality of response. In July 2007, there were floods in the UK. A period of heavy rain caused local flooding. The River Severn burst its banks. Roads were closed. But then water treatment works were flooded and hundreds of thousands lost drinking water. Electricity was affected as various substations were flooded and recovery lasted weeks. It could have been worse. The fire brigade and military worked together to construct improvised flood defences for the Waltham electricity substation and pump away water. Floodwaters came about 5 centimetres from overwhelming these defences and causing a prolonged regional blackout, affecting 500,000 people. Regardless, a crisis slowly got worse and people won't have known if they were almost through it or if it was only going to get worse. Because you don't know where you are in a crisis, people will default to guessing. And they tend to go one of two ways. Either normalcy bias, where people assume it will all blow over, not taking sensible steps to mitigate the crisis, or waiting for some outside authority to come and confirm it's real before doing anything. They might not fill up the car with fuel, not stock up on medication, or refuse to evacuate when it's high time to do so. Or flipping into full survival mode, quitting your job or taking on debt because you think the economy has permanently collapsed, falling out with neighbours because you assume they're going to be coming for your beans, or bugging out to the woods because of some disturbance. Taking a more measured response doesn't mean doing nothing and just waiting, but it's about preserving options as long as you can. There's actually an engineering idea that I like to use for thinking about this: graceful degradation. Engineers use the term for any system that fails part way, without failing completely. Think about your phone battery. At 20%, it doesn't just switch off. It dims the screen, kills background apps, throttles the processor and keeps the one thing you actually need, calls and texts, running longest. It sheds the nice-to-haves and protects the essentials. Graceful degradation isn't stay exactly as you are, and it isn't collapse into survival mode. It's a third option. You adapt in stages, little at a time, based on evidence rather than adrenaline, shedding the non-essential and protecting the essential. And every step you take is one that you could still walk back if the crisis turns out to be nothing. So on day one of a crisis, you should try to live as normal a life as you can. After all, it probably will blow over quickly. Don't go rationing the food and stressing everyone out at a time when the household doesn't need it. A key advantage of this is morale and goodwill. Having a shelf of supplies is great, but keeping a cool head and the cooperation of those around you must be at least as important. The other idea is preserving optionality. This means avoiding decisions that close off your future choices before the evidence really justifies them. However, you can make preparations for future steps. Working from home rather than immediately quitting, postponing a weekend trip rather than refusing to leave the house indefinitely. Fill the car and park it facing out rather than immediately evacuating. Move valuables upstairs or put them in waterproof boxes rather than permanently abandoning the house. Reduce discretionary spending rather than liquidating investments or taking on debt. Start with unused subscriptions. After a while, start cancelling Netflix and Amazon if things haven't improved. Try packing a bag and identifying destinations rather than just heading off into the woods. Maybe phone ahead and sound out a friend or two and see if things are a bit more sane where they are. So I don't think the start of a crisis flips you from being a prepper to being a survivalist. What actually happens is your job slowly changes. You stop collecting gear and start managing uncertainty. And most prepping content is built around states: normal life, bug out, grid down. What it doesn't talk about is the bit in between, how you actually move from one to the next, deliberately and with control. That's what this has really been about. Thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to our next video.